Hello and welcome to another Teacher's Corner. I'm Teacher Kirby, and today we're going to continue the series, about the specialization trees. Today we're going to be going over the pilot tree. And the pilot tree, like the intelligence tree that we've already gone over, is a primary specialization. This means it can be this means it has 4 tiers. Okay, so it has 4 tiers. And it can be slotted either as a primary or a secondary specialization. And remember, if you slot it as a secondary specialization, only the first 2 tiers are available. The skills within them are available for you to use. Okay. Now, so pilot does a few things. One thing to notice or to note is that one of the things it does is while you have pilot slotted, it does give you an increase to your turn rate. Okay? It gives you, as long as you have 1 point spent in it, it gives you plus 10 to your turn rate. And as you can see, I have 30 points spent. If I had this as a specialization, it would give me plus 40 to my turn rate. That's the same as an RCS console, or very similar to an RCS console. So for cruisers, for big ships, this can be a big plus because it's a way of increasing your turn rate without having to use up a console slot. Alright, so let's look into pilot. Everything in pilot affects things in space. The other specializations that are primary specializations affect both ground and space, but pilot affects only space. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. So first we have, if I go from left, I'll start with the left tree. We have maneuvering thrusters. What this does is while you're at a full stop, you're still able to utilize, even if your engines are offline, you're still able to utilize your ship's maneuvering thrusters, okay, so that it seems to have retained a small portion of its base rate or base speed and turn rate. So what this means is that even while you are stopped, you still get a slightly faster turn rate, okay, and you have a larger bit of speed, okay, when you have maneuvering thrusters on. Even while you're stopped, or if your engines are taken offline, you don't have to stop completely. It's not going to stop you completely. You'll still be able to move. So this is this is a good thing, especially for PvP, where people will try to take subsystems offline to keep you from moving. You'll still be able to move. Alright, so moving down this tree, maneuvering thrusters 2, of course, doubles the stats of maneuvering thrusters 1, same as always. Now then we have, this is one of the popular things in the pilot tree, in the first few tiers, and that's attack pattern expertise. Okay, attack patterns are something that is very common in DPS-centric builds, okay, especially DPS-centric builds, because they either buff your damage or debuff your opponents. Well, attack pattern expertise, anytime you activate an attack pattern, bridge officer ability, it gives your starship temporary hit points. It actually gives quite a bit of temporary hit points. You see here, when activating attack patterns, 3,038.8 temporary hit points for 15 seconds. If you are damaged during this time while those hit points are there, the game will take the damage off of those temporary hit points before actually draining more hit points from your hull. Okay, so this increases your survivability a little bit. Okay, and of course if I go down a little further, attack pattern expertise 2 increases the amount of temporary hit points you get to 6,077.5. Okay, again for 15 seconds. And again, this will drain from your temporary hit point pool before draining from your hull points. Okay, so this is actually quite a good boost for survivability, okay, because they come up quite frequently. Thing with attack patterns, if you're using, for example, like I use attack pattern beta on this tune, okay, attack pattern beta can be up once every 15 to 20 seconds. So what that means is you can have these up quite frequently, so it draws from these before it takes from your hull, which is a very good thing. It is passive, so once you have it unlocked, if as long as you have this either as primary or secondary specialization, then these will automatically apply to you anytime you hit an attack pattern. And it does not matter which attack pattern as well. Alright, next thing over, back her off. Back her off basically increases your defense and maximum speed while moving in reverse. So it gives you a bit of a speed boost and defense boost while you're in reverse. You're less likely to be hit, and you can get out of dodge a little faster if you need to. Okay? Alright, moving up to the next side, Eat My Dust. When an attacker fires upon the rear arc of your ship, you gain a stacking bonus to your defense. This means that you are harder to hit. So this is actually quite a good thing. So it means when you're trying to run away, like say you're about to die, you want to get out of range so that you can't be hit, so you can heal up very quickly, this makes your ship a little harder to hit while an attacker's firing at you, so you're less likely to die. And of course, Eat My Dust 2 increases the stats on it. You get 4% instead of 2% defense bonus. Okay, and it does stack, so 4% stacked up to 5 times, that's 20%. Okay. Alright, next up is Desperate Flight. Desperate Flight is the hull of your ship takes increasing amounts of damage. Flight speed and turn rate will raise higher and higher. Okay, so this means basically the lower your hull, the higher your flight speed and your turn rate. Okay. The bonus does not apply until your hull is below 80% capacity and caps out when you're at 20%. Okay. And the maximum is 10% bonus. Alright, and of course Desperate Flight 2 down below it doubles the stats to a maximum of a 20% bonus to turn rate and flight speed. And the final one on tier 1 is Reckless Abandon. So this is activating evasive maneuvers now grants you brief immunity to all movement impairing effects. In other words, evasive maneuvers can now get you out of a tractor beam as long as you have Reckless Abandon slotted. Okay, this includes the following effects: slow, root, hold, engines offline, and repel. So as long as, even if your engines are online, you'll still be able to move. Okay, but you have to use evasive maneuvers, which is a captain skill, so everybody should have that once they're at the point where they're playing STFs. So that is a quite good, cheap way of getting out of a tractor beam. Alright, Rock and Roll. This was another popular skill when the pilot tree first came out, because what Rock and Roll does is it gives you an immunity. While you're in Rock and Roll, you are immune to all damage. Okay. It also automatically gives you a bit of flight speed during the duration of Rock and Roll, but your turn rate is set to 0, which means you're going to move forward. You're going to do a barrel roll in your ship, which is quite interesting on certain ships, and then you're going to level out and go back to whatever speed you were at prior to engaging Rock and Roll. But the good thing is that you are immune to damage while you are doing this. It is possible, if you start a fire at will sequence before you hit Rock and Roll, to fire at will your way through a group of enemies while being immune to any damage that they put through you by using Rock and Roll. Neat little trick, fun to do. Okay. And then there's a few things that enhance your Rock and Roll. Okay, or enhance different abilities after your Rock and Roll. All Shook Up. After executing Rock and Roll maneuver, your ship remains more difficult to hit with weapons for a short duration. So All Shook Up 1 gives you plus 10% defense for 10 seconds. All Shook Up 2 gives you plus 20% defense for 10 seconds. So you'll be a little hard to hit as you come out of Rock and Roll. Always nice to have. And then you have Magic Carpet Ride. And again, after executing Rock and Roll maneuver, you retain a large turn rate bonus for a short period of time. So you're able to turn around and go back and hit them. 10% with Magic Carpet Ride 1, 20% with Magic Carpet Ride 2. Alright, now we get into the tier 3. These are the abilities with Pilot that a lot of people don't talk about. First we have Turn the Other Cheek. Now remember, these abilities are only available if you slot Pilot as a primary specialization. Most people use it as secondary, and I'll go into why in a little bit. Alright, so Turn the Other Cheek. Turn the Other Cheek, taking damage applies a temporary boost to shield hardness on the opposite facing from the one damaged. So if people are shooting at your front shield, shield hardness boost is applied to your rear shield. If people are shooting at your left shield, then a shield hardness boost is applied to your right shield. Okay, and that reduces damage by 5% to the opposite shield facing. Okay, Turn the Other Cheek 2, same thing, except the damage reduction is 10%. And Turn the Other Cheek 3 reduces damage by 20%. And if we look thick of it, whenever Turn the Other Cheek becomes active on all 4 of your shield facings at the same time, meaning so if you have people shooting at all 4 facings, so you get all 4 of them activated, you are granted a brief period of complete damage immunity. May only occur once every 30 seconds. So if something is hitting at you from all sides, activates the shield hardness on all 4 sides, you get an immunity damage for 2 seconds. Thick of It 2 increases that duration to 4 seconds. This can be a lifesaver under the right circumstances. Alright, moving on to Danger Zone. When you gain a bonus, to your damage output for each foe within 2 kilometers of your ship. This bonus can stack up to 10 times maximum. Does not apply to mines, turrets, or targetable torpedoes. So this means you have to be close to enemies within 2 kilometers. Okay? This is quite difficult to maintain, but worth it nonetheless. Okay, you get 2% damage bonus, stacks up to 10 times. So if you can keep 10 enemies within 2 kilometers of you, you can get up to a 20% damage bonus. Like I said, difficult to do, but if this is something that you are able to do, can be worth it. Okay. Then we have Wingman. Wingman extends the effects of Danger Zone to count allies as well. Okay. So while they still have to be within 2 kilometers of your ship, it will now count allies. So now it doesn't matter whether they're friendly or enemy ships that are near you. As long as you have something near you, it's going to help to increase your damage by 2% for every ship that's within 2 kilometers. Okay? Again, 2 kilometers is a very short distance in space battle, so that is difficult to get. Alright, moving on to Scratch the Paint. This ability right here is why a lot of people do not run Pilot as their primary specialization, and we'll explain why. With Scratch the Paint, you become immune to 1 warp core breach as long as this is active. Being hit by a warp core breach removes the effect, but it automatically refreshes after some time has passed. So immunity to kinetic damage from warp core breach once per 60 seconds. And a lot of you are probably going, well, gee, that means I won't blow up to the cube at the beginning of ISA, or, it's a great thing. And on the surface, yes, but a lot of DPS players especially, and this is where a lot of my expertise is, a lot of players don't use this because of this ability, because the warp core breach is the most reliable and probably safest way of getting the go down fighting to activate reliably on a tactical tune. What do I mean by that? In order for go down fighting to activate, let me show you go down fighting. Go down fighting is a tactical captain ability. Okay, and it's a scaled damage buff, so lower hull equals more damage. Okay, you get a damage boost. You can only activate it if your hull is under 50%. Okay, So you have to get your hull low. Now, in order to do this, that means you have to take damage. If you can get your hull under 50% or to a low amount like 1%, 2%, 5% in one shot very quickly, that's going to help you to get a huge amount of damage boost out of go down fighting. The most reliable way to do that, to go from over 50% down to 5%, is to use the warp core explosion from that initial cube in an ISA, for example. Okay, this is one of the ways that the high DPS guys do this. Okay, I'm still mastering this. I am not very good at doing it, but I know that you use the warp core breach. So if you're using pilot, you just eliminate it as primary and you've unlocked Scratch the Paint. You just eliminated your most reliable way of getting a huge damage boost at the beginning of ISA. So, a lot of DPS players do not use pilot as their primary specialization. Now, this of course only applies to tactical toons, but most DPS players are tactical toons. So, generally it's not recommended to use pilot as a primary for this very reason. The other reason, of course, is because Intel gives the flanking bonus, but you only get the flanking bonus if Intel is your primary. So that's why up until Strategist at least came out, the usual meta was people slotted Intel as primary and pilot as secondary, because they get all the lovely immunities and health boosts from the temporary hit points and things like that, and the defense boost from pilot, but they don't have to worry about losing the ability to use the warp core breach to get their go down fighting, or GDF. Alright, so this can be useful though for science toons, for engineers. So it really depends on your build, but this is a consideration to think about. If you are a tactical toon, you're probably going to want to steer clear from slotting pilot as your primary. Okay, because of that skill. Moving on, we have impulse drafting, and of course we have 1 and 2. So impulse drafting as a defense bonus to each stack of danger zone. So as you stack and gain a damage boost from having enemies or friends near you, depending on which level of danger zone you have unlocked or whether you've unlocked wingman or not. Okay. It gives you a defense bonus of 1%, 2% if you have impulse drafting 2. Okay, which means you're going to be a little harder to hit. Alright, moving on, now we move down to Bob and Weave. When an enemy misses you in combat, you take the opportunity to hit them back, right where it hurts. Crit severity is increased for each stack of Bobbin Weave, up to 10 max. A successful critical hit removes all built up stacks of this buff. Now this sounds good on the surface, however, my experience with things like Bobbin Weave is that most players have, especially DPS oriented players, will have a large amount of crit chance. They'll have between 25 and 30%, which means 1 out of every about 3 to 4 shots is a critical hit. So what that means is you're only getting at most an extra 6% crit severity. Okay? Usually. And then it resets to 0. So it really doesn't, you don't really benefit a lot. And I say 6% crit severity because you gain 2% per stack. You get 1 stack every time that you do not land a critical hit, but if every 4th shot is a critical hit, then that means you've gained 3 stacks and then you critically hit, so you gain 6% crit severity. Really not all that worth it if that's going to be your main argument for slotting this tree. you're going to get more out of flanking, for example, from the intel tree than you will out of Bobbin Weave. Alright, so moving along, we have on the left side of the final tier, Lone Wolf. Lone Wolf take on the role of the Lone Wolf, single-handedly defeating the gathered foes and conquering the odds. Any players on your team that are within 10 kilometers will automatically placate foes near them when you activate this, making you the only valid target in range for a short time. To survive the inevitable onslaught of incoming fire, the Lone Wolf gains increased defense and automatic shield redistribution for the duration of this ability. The placate effect granted to allies is fragile to their own damage. If they continue dealing damage, it will wear off quickly. Okay, this is plain and simple, this is a tanking ability. So if you're considering a threat tank, you may want to consider adding this to your arsenal. Okay, it could help you in that situation if you need to gain a little extra threat very quickly. You can use this. But realize that the placate is actually going to expire very quickly. Alright. And we have on the other side, we have shield scraping. Shield scraping means flying at high speed into the shields of an enemy will drain their shield capacity and reduce their shield's resilience to incoming damage. So you're going to drain their shields and make it easier to punch through them. Okay, the magnitude of both effects will scale with the speed at which you scrape against them. You may scrape against enemies once per second, but any enemy recently scraped will be immune to further scraping for 10 seconds. So, wow, sounds like there's a huge battle going on outside of Kronos. So, you can hit an enemy once per second, but they're not going to take any damage to their shields or any extra damage from shield scraping for 10 seconds after you hit them. And of course, there's 2 levels of this. The higher level takes more gives more damage to the shield facing and scales slightly higher. Okay. Alrighty. So the other thing with all of these specialization trees is when you unlock all of them, you get a trait. So with Intel, for example, it was predictive algorithms and improved predictive algorithms. When you completely spec out the pilot tree, you get the trait improved pedal to the metal. And this is maintaining full throttle for extended durations, allows you to build up excess resonant energy that can be directed into outgoing attacks as additional damage. Okay, so basically you get 2% all damage bonus for 2 seconds spent at full throttle. Maximum 10 stacks. All stacks immediately lost if throttle is dropped. So what does this mean? This means if you're going full speed, okay, then you can get up to a 20% damage boost, but you have to maintain that full speed. If you back off from it, even in the slightest, you immediately lose the entire damage bonus. So you have to stay at that full speed in order to take advantage of it. This has its pros and cons. The plus side of this is it is a free thing. It is a free ship trait. It doesn't cost you anything. All you got to do is just level up pilot and you get it. It doesn't matter if you slot pilot as a primary, secondary, or not at all. As long as it's unlocked, you have it available to slot. And there are players who do like to fly around in circles and go at full speed, and this would definitely benefit them. However, it is easy to get out of position. You have to have really good turn rate in order to be effective with this. And as I said, if you back off at all in the slightest in your speed, then you lose every single stack. Alright, so this has been the pilot specialization tree. Again, this usually is considered to be a good candidate for a secondary specialization while you're in space. especially if you are attack. If you are attack, I do not recommend using it as primary. Has some really good things in here, good survivability, okay, and some good boosts to immunity and things like that. Alright, this is Teacher Kirby. I hope you've learned something, and I'll see you next week.